welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. CDC Field Research Log, Dr. Eliza Warren. Location: Pinewood Creek, Missouri. Date: April 2nd, 2025. They sent me here to track an anomalous flu strain. That's what the official paperwork says, at least. 3 cases of unspecified respiratory distress with unusual symptom progression. Nothing that should warrant a full CDC emergency deployment. Nothing that explains why my supervisor pulled me aside before I left Atlanta and whispered, "Don't trust the emergency broadcasts. I've been in Pinewood Creek for 6 hours. Population 1,842 according to the weathered sign at the town limits. Though the emptiness of Main Street makes me wonder if that number's still accurate." The local clinic is a converted Victorian house at the edge of town, staffed by a single physician, Dr. Thomas, who looks like he hasn't slept in days. "For more cases came in last night," he told me, eyes darting to the window every few seconds. "I'd like to say it's just the flu, but I've never seen influenza that makes people forget themselves." When I asked him to elaborate, he just shook his head and handed me the patient files. The symptoms listed were inconsistent: fever, disorientation, and unusual skin discoloration in some cases, but perfectly normal vitals in others. The only commonality was a strange rash along the nape of the neck, spreading down the spine. Not raised or inflamed like an allergic reaction, but almost like a pattern forming beneath the skin. I spent the afternoon examining the first patient, Eleanor Mills, 43, elementary school teacher. She was alert but oddly passive, answering my questions with minimal responses. The rash on her neck had deepened to a dark red, branching out in thin lines that resembled circuit patterns. When I asked how she felt, she simply stared at me and said, "I feel connected now." Her husband sat in the corner of the examination room, fidgeting with his wedding band. "She's not herself," he whispered when Eleanor went to the bathroom. "She sits up at night, staring at the radio. Won't eat unless I remind her. And yesterday, I caught her standing in our backyard, completely still, for 3 hours. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was receiving instructions." I've taken blood samples from Eleanor and the other 3 patients. Initial examinations show elevated white cell counts, but nothing that explains the behavioral changes. I've requested additional equipment from the CDC, but the earliest it will arrive is tomorrow evening. The motel I'm staying at is the only one in town. A row of cabins overlooking a lake that would be picturesque if not for the abandoned boats tilting at the docks and the silence that hangs over everything. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Holden, barely looked at me when I checked in, just pushed a key across the counter and mumbled, "Don't leave your cabin if you hear the alerts." I didn't know what she meant until an hour ago. I was organizing my notes when the radio on my bedside table suddenly turned itself on. At first, I thought it was faulty wiring or that I'd accidentally hit the power button, but then I noticed all the electronic devices in my room activating simultaneously. My laptop screen lighting up, my phone vibrating on the table. A flat, mechanical voice filled the room. "This is an emergency alert for Pinewood Creek and surrounding areas. All residents must remain indoors. Maintain communication silence. Further instructions will follow." The broadcast repeated 3 times before cutting off abruptly, leaving nothing but static. In the silence that followed, I could hear doors closing throughout the motel, locks clicking into place. I called the sheriff's department immediately. The deputy who answered sounded annoyed when I asked about the alert. "Standard procedure, ma'am. We've been having issues with the regional water supply. Nothing for you to worry about." But his explanation doesn't make sense. Why would a water supply issue require communication silence? And why did Mrs. Holden seem so afraid? I tried calling my supervisor at the CDC, but the call wouldn't connect. My cell phone shows full signal, yet every call drops after one ring. Internet access is similarly inconsistent. I can load basic web pages, but any attempt to send emails with my initial findings fails. Something is wrong in Pinewood Creek. The isolation of this place, surrounded by dense forests with only one main road in and out, suddenly feels less quaint and more strategic. I've visited remote communities for outbreak containment before, but I've never felt this sense of being cut off, of being watched. I took a walk around the motel grounds after the alert ended, trying to clear my head. The lake was completely still, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. No wind, no insects chirping, just silence. And then I noticed something odd about the water, a faint red tinge along the shoreline, the same color as the rash spreading across Eleanor Mill's neck. When I knelt down to take a sample, I felt someone watching me. Across the lake, partially hidden by trees, stood a figure, too distant to make out clearly, but unmistakably staring in my direction. I called out, but they didn't respond, didn't move, just watched. When I took a step toward them, they retreated into the treeline. Back in my cabin, I secured the water sample in a sealed container. Without proper equipment, I can't analyze it thoroughly, but under my portable microscope, I can see microscopic organisms unlike anything I've encountered, structures that appear almost synthetic, moving with deliberate patterns rather than the random motion of typical microbes. It's nearly midnight now. I should try to sleep, but every time I close my eyes, I see those branching patterns spreading across Eleanor's skin. Hear her flat voice saying, "I feel connected now." The radio sits silent on my bedside table. I've unplugged it, removed the batteries for good measure, but I can't shake the feeling that it's still somehow active, still listening. Tomorrow I'll meet with the sheriff, try to get some straight answers about these emergency alerts and why the town seems to be operating under some unofficial quarantine. I'll also need to find someone named Sam Reeves. The motel owner mentioned he runs the local radio station and might know something about the unusual broadcasts. Whatever's happening in Pinewood Creek, it's not just an anomalous flu strain. My supervisor knew it when she warned me about the emergency broadcasts. The question is, how much worse is the reality, and why send me here alone if they suspected something of this magnitude? I've locked my door and windows, but in a town this small, with whatever is spreading through it, I don't know if physical barriers will be enough to keep me safe. This is Dr. Eliza Warren, CDC Field Researcher. End of Day 1 Log. CDC Field Research Log, Dr. Eliza Warren. Location, Pinewood Creek, Missouri. Date, April 3, 2025. The infection is spreading faster than I initially estimated. 7 new cases arrived at the clinic this morning, all presenting with the same distinctive rash pattern along the spine, though at varying stages of development. The most advanced cases show the circuit-like markings spreading across their shoulder blades and around their throats, creating what almost looks like a collar. I met with Sheriff Dale Cooper today, a tall man with perpetually narrowed eyes and a handshake that lasted a beat too long. His office at the small sheriff's department smelled of coffee and gun oil, walls covered with hunting trophies and faded maps of the county. "We've had unusual illnesses before," he said when I showed him my preliminary findings. "Tick-borne diseases, seasonal infections. Nothing the town can't handle without federal interference." There was an edge to his voice when he said federal, fingers drumming against his holster as he spoke. When I pressed him about the emergency alerts, his demeanor shifted subtly. "Standard protocol for rural communities during public health concerns," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Keeps panic at bay. But I've worked enough outbreak scenarios to know that unexplained emergency broadcasts typically cause panic, not prevent it." When I pointed this out, Sheriff Cooper stood abruptly, suggesting our meeting had concluded. "Dr. Warren," he said at the door, "folks around here value their privacy. They don't appreciate outsiders implying there's something unnatural happening." I hadn't used the word unnatural, but his choice of terminology lingered with me as I left. The equipment I requested from the CDC arrived this afternoon, portable lab equipment, additional test kits, and a satellite phone since my cell service has become increasingly unreliable. I've set up a makeshift lab in my motel room. The blood samples I've collected show increasingly bizarre anomalies. Under the microscope, I can see what appear to be foreign bodies attaching themselves to red blood cells. They're not viral or bacterial in any traditional sense. They almost look like microscopic transmitters, with crystalline structures that catch the light at odd angles. More disturbing is what happens when these infected samples are exposed to certain frequencies. Using a basic radio frequency generator from my equipment, I noticed the organisms become agitated at specific bands, particularly those close to emergency broadcast wavelengths. At the clinic, I examined 2 more patients: Bradley Chun, a local pharmacist, and Maria Gonzalez, a high school student. Both exhibited the characteristic rash, but Maria's case was particularly advanced. The markings had spread to her temples, faint lines trailing toward her ears. During the examination, she kept tilting her head as if listening to something. "Can you hear them planning?" she asked me suddenly, her eyes unnervingly clear. "They're building something inside us." When I asked who they were, she smiled faintly and said, "The ones who found us through our own signals. We've been broadcasting our location for years. Now they're broadcasting back." Dr. Thomas pulled me aside after the examination. "She was a straight-A student," he whispered, "completely normal until 3 days ago. Now her parents say she stands by the radio all night, whispering numbers." Following my instincts, I sought out Sam Reeves at the local radio station, a small building at the edge of town with a transmission tower that seemed disproportionately large for a community this size. The station itself was little more than 2 rooms, a broadcast booth and a cluttered office filled with outdated equipment and tacked-up frequency charts. Sam was not what I expected. Early 30s, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and eyes that dart constantly between his equipment and the windows. He moved with a nervous energy, checking readings on various devices as we spoke. "The emergency broadcasts aren't coming from any official channel," he told me, voice low despite us being alone. "I've worked this station for 7 years. I know every emergency protocol, every authorized frequency. These signals, they're piggybacking on legitimate channels, overriding them." He showed me his logs, pointing to patterns of signal interruptions that began 3 weeks ago. Subtle at first, just milliseconds of dead air or static, but gradually increasing in duration and frequency. "The first person got sick 2 days after the interruptions became noticeable," he said. "Eleanor Mills. She was doing a community announcement spot in the studio. The signal cut out for about 5 seconds while she was on air. When it came back, she said she felt dizzy. The next day, she developed the rash. I asked if I could see his broadcast equipment. In the transmission room, Sam showed me readings from the past week, spikes in signal strength during the emergency broadcasts, power surges that his equipment couldn't account for. "Whatever's sending these isn't just using our frequencies," he said, pointing to a particular pattern on his monitors. "It's amplifying them, modulating them with something else. Something that shouldn't be possible with our current technology." As we examined the equipment, the lights in the station flickered. Sam's expression went rigid. He grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a supply closet. "They're coming," he whispered. "Someone must have seen you here." Before I could ask what he meant, the front door of the station opened. Through the crack in the closet door, I saw Sheriff Cooper and 2 deputies enter, flashlights sweeping the main office. "Reeves," Cooper called. "Got reports of unauthorized broadcasts. Need to check your logs." Sam's grip on my arm tightened as the sheriff moved toward the broadcast booth. For 15 tense minutes, we remained hidden as they searched the station, Cooper repeatedly running his fingers along the back of his neck where, I noticed with a chill, the faintest outline of a rash was visible beneath his collar. After they left, Sam slipped me a flash drive. "I've been recording the patterns in the emergency broadcasts," he said. "There's code embedded in them. Not any language I recognize, but definitely structured. Take this back to your people." "And Dr. Warren?" Don't trust anyone who touches their neck while talking to you. It means they're listening to something else. I returned to my motel room to find it exactly as I left it, yet somehow feeling disturbed, as if someone had moved through the space cataloging its contents without actually touching anything. The water sample I collected from the lake had changed, the organisms multiplying rapidly, forming geometric patterns against the glass. When I tried to use my satellite phone to contact CDC headquarters, all I got was a high-pitched tone followed by the same mechanical voice from the emergency broadcast. Communication suspended. Maintain isolation protocols. I'm documenting everything in case my equipment is compromised. The infection vector appears to be these broadcasts combined with something in the local water supply. The organisms respond to specific frequencies, using the human nervous system as both receiver and transmitter. The rash isn't a symptom. It's the physical manifestation of whatever is colonizing the hosts, creating its own network beneath their skin. Tomorrow, I need to find where the contamination in the water originated. Sam believes it might be upstream from the lake, possibly at the old dam facility that was decommissioned a decade ago. The more I discover, the more I'm convinced my assignment here wasn't coincidental. Someone at the CDC knew what was happening in Pinewood Creek. The question is whether they sent me to stop it or to document its progression. This is Dr. Eliza Warren. End of Day 2 log. CDC Field Research Log, Dr. Eliza Warren. Location, Pinewood Creek, Missouri. Date, April 4th, 2025. I broke containment protocol today. I had to. The standard procedures aren't designed for whatever this is. The day began with a disturbing discovery. The blood samples I'd collected from the infected patients had changed overnight. The foreign organisms weren't just attaching to red blood cells anymore. They were restructuring them, transforming human cells into something hybrid. Under the microscope, I watched as a white blood cell was systematically dismantled and reconstructed with crystalline filaments that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. I needed to test a theory. If these organisms were responding to specific frequencies as I'd observed yesterday, I needed to understand the extent of that response. Using the portable spectrum analyzer from my equipment case, I exposed the samples to various frequency ranges while monitoring cellular activity. Nothing happened until I reached the exact frequency band used by emergency broadcast systems, the same band the mysterious alerts had been using. At that precise frequency, the organisms became hyperactive, the crystalline structures vibrating in perfect synchronization. More disturbingly, they began to arrange themselves into patterns matching the circuit-like rash observed on patients' bodies. I was recording these reactions when Dr. Thomas called from the clinic. His voice was strained, panic bleeding through his professional demeanor. "You need to come now. Eleanor Mills' condition has progressed." At the clinic, I found Eleanor in isolation. The branching patterns had spread across her entire body, no longer just under the skin but pushing through it in places. Crystalline protrusions emerging along her spine and at her temples like macabre jewelry. Her eyes were clouded with a milky film that occasionally retracted to reveal perfectly clear irises underneath. "She hasn't spoken in hours," Dr. Thomas whispered, keeping his distance from the observation window. "Just stands there. Her husband tried to approach her this morning and He broke off, shuddering. She didn't attack him exactly. She placed her hand on his neck and he just froze. Started developing the rash within minutes. We have him sedated in another room." I suited up in full protective gear to enter Eleanor's room, though I was increasingly certain this infection wasn't airborne. She didn't acknowledge my presence when I entered, standing motionless in the center of the room, head tilted as if listening. I conducted basic neurological tests, pupil response, reflex examination, and found her physically responsive but mentally absent. When I spoke directly to her, she remained unresponsive. But when I activated a small radio I'd brought, tuning it to different frequencies, her head snapped toward me at specific bands. "Are you receiving signals, Eleanor?" I asked, watching her carefully. Her mouth opened, but the voice that emerged wasn't entirely human. It contained layers, her natural tone underneath something mechanical and precise. "We are becoming the receiver and the received," she said. "The broadcast and the audience. You could join us in the clarity, Dr. Warren." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told her my name. "What is being broadcast?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Instructions," she replied. "Blueprints. The architecture of union." When I asked who was sending these instructions, Eleanor's head tilted at an impossible angle, her neck extending as if the vertebrae had been restructured. "We have always been here," she said, "dormant in the deep water, waiting for the right frequency to awaken us. Your signals called to us. Now we call back." I left the isolation room with more samples, fluid from the crystalline protrusions, blood, and skin tissue. Back in my makeshift lab, I found that the crystalline structures weren't growing on the human cells but transforming them, reprogramming their basic functions to create a biological transmission network. This is when I broke protocol. CDC guidelines strictly prohibit experimental treatments during initial outbreak assessment, but I couldn't wait for bureaucratic approval. I exposed Eleanor's recent samples to a range of electromagnetic pulses, searching for any frequency that might disrupt the parasitic takeover. Most frequencies had no effect, but when I hit a specific band, just slightly offset from the emergency broadcast wavelength, the organisms recoiled. The crystalline structures vibrated chaotically before temporarily going dormant. I was documenting this reaction when Sheriff Cooper appeared at my motel room door, 2 deputies flanking him. The rash on his neck had spread, now visible above his collar. "Need to talk to you about unauthorized access to municipal water testing," he said, eyes never quite focusing on me. "Got reports you were at the lake taking samples." I kept my hand near the panic button on my satellite phone as I let them in, careful to stand where I could block view of my microscope and samples. "Just routine testing," I said. "CDC protocol for any unusual illness cluster." Cooper's eyes drifted to my equipment, then back to me. "Town council's concerned about panic spreading. Folks get nervous when government types start taking water samples." As he spoke, I noticed all 3 men periodically touching the backs of their necks, fingers tracing patterns that matched the rash. Sam's warning echoed in my mind. "I'll coordinate with local authorities before any further testing," I assured him, eager to end the encounter. Cooper nodded, seemingly satisfied, but as they turned to leave, one of the deputies paused, head tilting in that now familiar listening posture. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Cooper placed a hand on the deputy's shoulder, guiding him out. "Dr. Warren," Cooper said at the door, "we're implementing a town curfew tonight. For safety, don't go wandering after dark." The threat was clear beneath the official language. Once they left, I called Sam using a prepaid phone I'd purchased before arriving in Pinewood Creek, a precaution that now seemed prescient. "The sheriff and his deputies are showing signs of infection," I told him. "And I've discovered something important. The organisms respond to counter-frequencies. There might be a way to disrupt whatever signal is controlling them." Sam's voice was tight with tension. "I can't talk now. Meet me at the old fire tower off Route 16 at sunset. It's abandoned, no electronics there. Bring your equipment." Before disconnecting, he added, "Watch for the red pickup that's been circling town. Military plates, unmarked. Showed up yesterday after you visited the station." I packed only essential equipment and my notes, hiding the rest under the motel bed. Through the window, I could see more people gathering in the town square, dozens standing motionless, heads tilted skyward as if waiting for something. The infected are organizing. The parasites aren't just affecting individuals. They're creating a network, a collective intelligence using human bodies as nodes. And whatever entity is controlling this network, it's aware of me, aware of my investigation. I need to reach the fire tower before sunset to meet Sam. If my counterfrequency theory is correct, we might be able to disrupt the broadcast long enough to call for legitimate CDC containment support. But I'm increasingly certain that whatever is happening in Pinewood Creek has already spread beyond this town. The emergency broadcasts might be worldwide by now, piggybacking on existing networks, dormant until activated. This is Dr. Eliza Warren. I don't know when I'll be able to update this log again. If you're reading this and haven't heard any emergency broadcasts yet, turn off your radios. Disconnect. It's already too late for Pinewood Creek. End of Day 3 log. CDC Field Research Log, Dr. Eliza Warren. Location, Pinewood Creek, Missouri. Date, April 5th, 2025. The fire tower was a bust. Sam never showed. Instead, I found his radio equipment bag abandoned at the base of the tower, a trail of dark fluid leading into the surrounding woods. The fluid contained the same crystalline structures I've observed in infected blood samples, but more developed, almost architectural in their complexity. I waited for 3 hours, scanning the treeline with night vision goggles from my field kit. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No insects, no nocturnal animals. Just dense silence occasionally broken by distant, synchronized footsteps moving through the underbrush. Multiple people walking in perfect unison. When I finally risked returning to town, everything had changed. Military vehicles lined Main Street, Humvees and personnel carriers with blacked-out insignia. Men in hazmat suits were establishing checkpoints at every road leading into Pinewood Creek. A temporary command center had been erected in the town square, portable generators humming as technicians set up communications equipment. I approached one of the checkpoints, CDC credentials ready. The soldier stopped me, weapon not quite pointed at me but positioned for quick aim if needed. "Dr. Warren," he said before I could introduce myself. "Captain Reynolds is expecting you." The fact that he knew my name immediately put me on alert. I was escorted to the command center, a large tent filled with monitoring equipment and maps of the region. At the center stood a man in his mid-40s, military posture but wearing a specialized containment suit rather than standard uniform. Black tactical gear underneath suggested special operations rather than regular military. Captain Marcus Reynolds, National Guard Special Containment Division. He introduced himself, voice distorted slightly through his helmet's communication system. "We've been tracking the Pinewood Creek anomaly for 10 days. Your presence here complicated things, Doctor." "My presence?" I asked. "I was sent by the CDC to investigate an unusual illness cluster." Reynolds removed his helmet, revealing close-cropped hair and eyes that evaluated everything with clinical precision. "You were sent here because someone at your agency noticed our containment operation and wanted their own eyes on the ground. Interagency competition at its finest." His tone was bitter. "Now we have to incorporate you into the containment protocol instead of simply sealing the perimeter." He led me to a digital map display showing Pinewood Creek and surrounding areas. Red dots indicated infection clusters, far more widespread than my limited data had suggested. "The parasitic organism was first detected in the reservoir north of town 3 weeks ago," Reynolds explained. "Initial assessment suggested a waterborne pathogen with limited spread potential. That assessment was catastrophically wrong." He brought up surveillance footage showing infected individuals standing near radios, cell phones, and other communication devices. Their rashes pulsed with faint luminescence whenever emergency broadcasts played. "The organism uses sound waves as a secondary transmission vector," Reynolds continued. "The emergency broadcasts aren't warning about the infection. They are the infection. Encoded sonic patterns that activate dormant parasitic structures in those already exposed through water consumption." I showed him my research on counterfrequencies. I found that specific electromagnetic pulses can temporarily disrupt the parasite's activity. "If we could broadcast these counterfrequencies." "We've tried that," Reynolds interrupted. 3 days ago. It worked for approximately 6 hours before the organism adapted, incorporating our countersignal into its own broadcast pattern. Now it's stronger than before." A technician approached with a tablet displaying new readings. Reynolds studied them, jaw tightening. "The infection rate has accelerated. 78% of Pinewood Creek's population now shows stage 2 infection markers or higher." When I asked about evacuation plans for uninfected residents, Reynolds' expression darkened. "There is no evacuation, Doctor. Regional quarantine protocol is already in effect. No one enters or leaves the containment zone until we understand how to neutralize this threat. I thought of Sam missing in the woods. I have a contact in town, the local radio operator. He's been tracking the signal patterns since they started. Sam Reeves, Reynolds nodded. We've been monitoring his broadcasts. He went dark 12 hours ago after reporting unusual activity at the old dam. My stomach dropped. The dam? That's where he thought the contamination originated. Reynolds pulled up satellite imagery of the dam facility, an aging concrete structure holding back the reservoir that fed Pinewood Creek's water supply. Heat signatures showed dozens of figures converging on the facility. Whatever's controlling the infected has them gathering at specific locations. The dam is one. The radio tower is another. He pointed to another cluster of heat signatures. They're building something, Dr. Warren, using the infected as labor. I was processing this information when Sheriff Cooper was brought into the command center, restrained and surrounded by armed soldiers. The rash on his neck had evolved, crystalline structures visibly protruding from beneath his skin. His eyes were clouded with that same milky film I'd observed in Eleanor Mills. We found him attempting to access our communication equipment, one soldier reported. Reynolds approached Cooper cautiously. Sheriff, can you understand me? Cooper's head tilted in that now familiar listening posture. When he spoke, his voice contained the same layered quality I'd heard in Eleanor, his natural tone underlying something mechanical and precise. Your containment efforts are inefficient, he said. The broadcast cannot be contained by physical barriers. The signal is already propagating beyond your perimeter. Reynolds glanced at me. We've noticed the infected can communicate with each other despite having no direct contact. They function as a network. Cooper's eyes fixed on me. Dr. Warren has valuable insights. Her research on counterfrequencies demonstrates adaptability of thought. She would make an excellent receiver. A chill ran through me at the implication. The parasite, or whatever intelligence controlled it, was evaluating humans for compatibility. What is the purpose of the emergency broadcasts? I asked Cooper directly. Preparation, he replied. The human nervous system requires reconfiguration to serve as proper transmission architecture. The broadcasts provide the necessary instructions for this conversion. Conversion to what? Reynolds demanded. Cooper's expression remained blank. To receivers worthy of the message. What message? I pressed. The one that has always been waiting in the deep. The one your species has been inadvertently calling to with your radio waves for decades. We have been patient. Now we rise to answer. Before we could question him further, every electronic device in the command center activated simultaneously. Screens flickering, radios hissing with static. The emergency broadcast began playing from multiple sources at once, but different from previous versions. This time, the mechanical voice was overlaid with thousands of human voices speaking in perfect unison. All remaining safe zones have been overwhelmed. Integration will now accelerate. Resistance impedes optimal signal clarity. Cooper's eyes rolled back as the crystalline structures on his neck pulsed in sync with the broadcast. Two soldiers restraining him suddenly stiffened, their hands flying to their necks where faint rashes were already forming. Shut everything down, Reynolds barked. Technicians scrambled to power off equipment, but the broadcast continued from the soldiers' communication headsets. Reynolds grabbed my arm, pulling me toward an isolation chamber at the back of the tent. We have to assume all electronic communication is compromised, he said, voice tight with controlled panic. From now on, we go analog only. Written communications, direct verbal orders. Inside the chamber, designed to block all electronic signals, Reynolds revealed why my counterfrequency discovery had interested him. We've been developing sonic weapons to disrupt the parasite's communication network, he explained, showing me schematics on a non-networked tablet. But we need to understand the base frequency the organism uses before we can effectively counter it. Your research might be the missing piece. I studied the schematics, noting both the brilliance and the fundamental flaw in their approach. This would temporarily disrupt their network, but the organism adapts quickly. We'd need to continuously modify the countersignal. Reynolds nodded grimly. That's why we need to find the original source, whatever's generating the core broadcast that all these emergency alerts are mimicking. We believe it's somewhere near the dam, using the water as both conductor and amplifier. As we spoke, a soldier burst into the isolation chamber, breathing heavily. "Sir, the infected have breached the perimeter. They're not attacking, just walking straight through our containment lines, ignoring commands to stop." Reynolds checked his watch. "How long until the backup team arrives?" "Communications are down, sir. We can't raise headquarters." I felt the walls closing in. The quarantine was failing, the infection spreading beyond Pinewood Creek, and our only potential ally, Sam Reeves, was missing. "I need to get to the dam," I said suddenly. "If that's where this started, there might be uncontaminated samples of the organism in its original state. I could study how it functioned before adapting to human hosts." Reynolds considered this, then nodded. "I'll assemble a team. We move in 30 minutes. He handed me a sealed envelope. "If I show signs of infection, open this. It contains authorization codes for protocol burning echo, our last resort if containment fails completely." As he left to prepare the team, I wondered what last resort meant in the face of an organism that could hijack emergency broadcasts nationwide. Whatever waited for us at the dam, I suspected it was just one node in a much larger network. A network that had been assembling itself beneath our awareness for longer than we realized. "This is Dr. Eliza Warren. If these logs are found and I've been infected, implement the counterfrequency formula in my research notes immediately before the parasite can adapt to it." End of day for log. CDC Field Research Log, Dr. Eliza Warren. Location, en route to Pinewood Dam, Missouri. Date, April 6, 2025. Dawn broke over Pinewood Creek in shades of sickly amber as our convoy departed the military checkpoint. Captain Reynolds led a team of 6 soldiers, all equipped with modified communications gear, earpieces designed to filter out the frequencies associated with the emergency broadcasts. I rode in the lead Humvee, my equipment packed in hardened cases that Reynolds assured me were signal-proof. "The dam is 14 miles north," Reynolds explained as we navigated the increasingly deserted roads. "Built in the 1950s to create the reservoir that supplies water to 3 counties. Decommissioned for public use a decade ago due to structural concerns. But the Army Corps of Engineers maintained a monitoring station there until last year." "What happened last year?" I asked. Reynolds' jaw tightened. "Budget cuts. Automated systems replaced the human monitoring team. The first reports of unusual water quality came 3 months after the last personnel left. The road grew rougher as we approached the foothills, forest pressing in on both sides. Twice we had to stop to clear fallen trees from the path. The second time, one of the soldiers noticed something disturbing. The trees hadn't fallen naturally. They'd been deliberately cut and positioned to block the road. "Someone's trying to keep us from reaching the dam," Reynolds muttered, scanning the tree line. We were about 5 miles from our destination when we found the first body. A hiker, based on his gear, sprawled beside the road with the now familiar rash covering his exposed skin. Unlike the living infected we'd encountered, the parasitic structures had continued growing after death, erupting from the corpse in crystalline formations that caught the morning light in prismatic patterns. More disturbingly, the formations appeared to be transmitting something. Subtle vibrations that caused nearby plants to bend toward the body, their growth visibly accelerated and distorted. "Don't touch anything," Reynolds ordered as I collected samples. "We've observed posthumous development in other cases. The organism doesn't die with the host. It repurposes the remaining biomass." As we continued toward the dam, the forest changed. Trees grew at impossible angles, branches intertwining in complex lattice patterns. Fungal growths pulsed with faint bioluminescence, creating networks across the forest floor that mirrored the circuit-like rash on infected humans. The air smelled metallic, charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. The ecosystem itself is being modified, I observed, documenting the changes with my field camera. The parasite isn't just affecting humans. It's restructuring all biological material it encounters. Reynolds nodded grimly. That's why headquarters authorized Protocol Burning Echo. If we can't contain this, he didn't finish the sentence. But the implication was clear. Scorched earth policy. Total sterilization of the affected area. We abandoned the vehicles 2 miles from the dam when the road became impassable. Strange organic barricades blocked our path. Twisted masses of vegetation and what appeared to be partially dissolved animal matter, all infused with the same crystalline structures we'd observed in human hosts. As we proceeded on foot, I noticed a pattern in how the forest had been reshaped. All structures curved toward the dam, creating channels that would amplify and direct sound waves emanating from that location. The entire landscape was being transformed into an amplification system for whatever signal was being broadcast. A mile from the dam, we found Sam Reeves. He was alive, but barely recognizable. Huddled in a shallow cave, he'd covered himself in mud mixed with some chemical compound that gave off an acrid odor. The rash pattern was visible on his neck, but it appeared stunted, the progression somehow delayed. "Dr. Warren," he croaked when he saw me, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. "You got my message." "What message?" Reynolds demanded. "We found your equipment at the fire tower." Sam shook his head weakly. "Left that as a decoy. Knew they were tracking me." Real message was in the frequency pattern I broadcast before going dark. Coordinates embedded in dead air. I realized the significance immediately. The counter frequencies I detected in my lab. "Those came from you?" Sam nodded. "Been experimenting since this started. Found that certain mineral compounds disrupted the signal temporarily." He gestured to the chemical-laced mud covering his skin. "Iron oxide mixed with copper sulfate. Burns like hell but slows the infection." Reynolds knelt beside him. "What did you find at the dam?" Sam's expression darkened. "Not what. Who?" He fumbled with a battered camera, showing us digital photos of the dam's interior. The images showed the abandoned control room transformed into something monstrous. Walls covered in the crystalline structures, but arranged with unmistakable purpose. Circuit patterns converged on what had once been the dam's communications array, now grown into an organic transmission tower. At the center stood a figure I recognized, Eleanor Mills. But she was no longer remotely human. Her body had been completely overtaken by the parasitic structures, transformed into a glistening, crystalline entity that interfaced directly with the modified equipment. Other infected townspeople surrounded her in concentric circles, their bodies linked by tendrils of the same material. "She's become the primary node," Sam explained. "The receiver that became a transmitter." Everything started after they found something during routine maintenance last year. Something buried in the deepest part of the reservoir since before the dam was built. The final photo showed a partially excavated object protruding from the reservoir bed, a metallic structure of non-terrestrial design, covered in symbols that hurt the eyes to focus on. "It was dormant until they exposed it to air," Sam continued. "Then it released microscopic organisms into the water. Organisms designed to reconfigure biological systems into communication architecture." Reynolds studied the photos, his military composure slipping for the first time. "How many infected are at the dam now?" "Dozens, maybe hundreds," Sam replied. "All in different stages of transformation. They're building something bigger than the dam itself. A transmission array powerful enough to broadcast globally." As we processed this information, one of the soldiers monitoring our perimeter approached. "Sir, movement in the trees. Lots of it." Through binoculars, I could see figures moving through the forest, infected townspeople walking in perfect synchronization, all converging on our location. Their movements were no longer human, jerky, insect-like, with limbs bending at unnatural angles to navigate the terrain. "They found us," Reynolds said, checking his weapon. "We need to move now if we're going to reach the dam." Sam grabbed my arm weakly. There's something else you need to know. The counter frequencies don't just disrupt their communication. They cause pain to whatever intelligence is controlling this network. During my experiments, I picked up responses in languages I couldn't identify, but the emotional content was clear: rage, frustration, and most disturbing of all, recognition. Like it knows who we are specifically, not just as humans, but as individuals. A cold realization washed over me. It's been in our communication networks longer than we realized, watching us, learning about us, which means it knows what we're planning, Reynolds concluded grimly. He turned to his team. Change of plans. Dr. Warren and I will continue to the dam with Reeves. The rest of you create a diversion to draw away the infected. As the soldiers prepared explosives from their packs, Reynolds pulled me aside. If we can't disrupt the signal source permanently, I'm authorized to implement Burning Echo. The entire reservoir and surrounding 10 miles will be sterilized. There are still uninfected people in that radius, I protested. Better than letting this spread across the continent, he replied, his expression leaving no room for debate. We helped Sam to his feet, supporting him between us as we moved toward the dam. Behind us, the first explosion tore through the forest, followed by gunfire as the soldiers engaged the approaching infected. The path ahead grew increasingly bizarre, the vegetation pulsing with the same rhythm I'd observed in infected blood samples under my microscope. In places, the ground itself had been transformed, soil particles bound together by microscopic crystalline filaments that shimmered with each step we took. As we crested the final ridge overlooking the dam, the full scope of what we faced became clear. The entire structure had been transformed, no longer just concrete and steel, but a hybrid of building materials and organic components. The crystalline growths had restructured the dam into something that resembled both technology and biology, neither fully machine nor organism, but something fundamentally other. And surrounding it, hundreds of infected humans stood in concentric circles, their bodies linked by glittering tendrils, faces turned upward as if in worship. At the center of it all, Eleanor Mills, or what remained of her, pulsed with energy that visibly distorted the air around her transformed body. She had become the heart of this new organism, the primary transmission node for whatever intelligence had awakened in the reservoir depths. My God, Sam whispered beside me. They're almost ready. When that array activates at full power, every emergency broadcast system on the planet will carry their signal. Reynolds finished, his voice hollow. As we watched in horror, Eleanor's transformed body began to emit a low, resonant tone that vibrated through the ground beneath our feet. The sound grew in intensity, and with it, the reservoir's surface began to ripple outward in perfect concentric circles. Whatever waited beneath those waters was rising to meet its new creation. This is Dr. Eliza Warren. We are about to attempt to penetrate the dam complex and destroy the primary transmission node. If no further logs follow this one, implement global emergency broadcast shutdown immediately. The signal is the infection. End of day 5 log. CDC Field Research Log, Dr. Eliza Warren. Location, Pinewood Dam, Missouri. Date, April 8, 2025. 2 days since my last entry. The tablet's battery died during our approach to the dam, and I've only just managed to recharge it using a jury-rigged solar panel Sam constructed from materials scavenged from an abandoned maintenance shed. My hands are still shaking as I type this. Not from fear, though God knows there's plenty to fear, but from the early-stage parasitic infection now spreading through my left arm. The crystalline structures have progressed 3 inches above my wrist despite Reynolds' tourniquet. The infection site tingles constantly, like thousands of microscopic ants burrowing beneath my skin, occasionally punctuated by sharp, electric jolts when emergency broadcasts ripple through the area. During broadcasts, the structures luminesce faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the signal. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to document what happened systematically. Our infiltration of the dam complex was initially successful. Reynolds' military training proved invaluable as we navigated the transformed structure, avoiding the concentric rings of infected hosts. The dam's interior had been completely reconfigured. Concrete walls now veined with crystalline growths that conducted both electricity and what appeared to be biological signals. The corridors no longer followed their original layout, but twisted into spiral patterns that all led toward the central transmission hub. Reynolds identified what had once been the hydroelectric control room, now serving as the primary broadcast center. Through observation hatches, we witnessed Eleanor Mills, if that designation still applies to what she's become, integrated directly into the broadcasting equipment. Her body has been completely transformed, skeletal structure elongated and reshaped to form antenna-like appendages. Skin replaced by translucent crystalline material that reveals pulsing light beneath. The equipment itself has changed too, melded with organic components in ways that defy conventional engineering. The infected aren't just hosts, Sam whispered as we watched. They're being converted into components of a communications array. 10 infected individuals surrounded Eleanor in a perfect circle, their bodies undergoing similar transformations, though less advanced. They stood absolutely motionless except during broadcasts, when they would sway in unison, generating harmonic frequencies that amplified the main signal. We managed to set up monitoring equipment in an adjacent maintenance tunnel. Sam's expertise allowed us to tap into the broadcast system without detection, analyzing the signal pattern. What we discovered confirmed my worst fears and revealed something even more disturbing. The signal isn't just infectious, Sam explained, showing us the waveform analysis. It's evolving. Each broadcast contains more complex instructions than the last, programming the parasites to reshape their hosts in increasingly sophisticated ways. Reynolds studied the data with growing alarm. These patterns, they match our military communication protocols. Not just standard emergency broadcasts, but encrypted military frequencies. They're learning from us, I realized, adapting our own communication systems to spread more efficiently. As if confirming my assessment, an emergency broadcast began while we were analyzing the data. The familiar tone sequence echoed through the dam, but this time, it was followed by Captain Reynolds' voice. "Attention all military personnel. Safe Zone Delta has been compromised. Fall back to Contingency Point Echo for immediate evacuation." Reynolds' face went pale. "That's not possible. That's a classified evacuation order. And that's my voice, but I never recorded that message." "They've sampled your communications," Sam said grimly. "They're replicating military authority to manipulate evacuation patterns." Reynolds immediately tried to contact his team using his secure radio. The response chilled us to the bone. "Captain Reynolds, this is Sergeant Paulson. We're receiving conflicting evacuation orders. Half the safe zones are reporting breach conditions simultaneously. Command structure is breaking down. Request immediate clarification." Before Reynolds could respond, Sheriff Cooper's voice cut through on the emergency channel, a channel he shouldn't have had access to. "This is Sheriff Dale Cooper to all law enforcement and emergency personnel. The military quarantine has failed. The infection is spreading through water systems and emergency broadcasts. Do not trust military evacuation orders. Repeat, military containment protocols have been compromised." The voice was Cooper's, but the cadence was wrong, too measured, too precise. Reynolds tried to override the broadcast, but our equipment began to malfunction, screens displaying cascading error messages before going dark. "They've detected our intrusion," Sam warned, frantically disconnecting cables. "We need to move. Now." As we retreated from our monitoring position, we encountered Sheriff Cooper and 2 deputies blocking the maintenance tunnel exit. The rash pattern covered the visible portions of their skin, but more alarming was their behavior. They moved in perfect synchronization, heads tilted at identical angles as they observed us. "Dr. Warren," Cooper spoke, but his voice resonated oddly, as if multiple people were speaking through him. "Your research has provided valuable data on counterfrequencies. The collective requires your expertise." Reynolds didn't hesitate. He fired 2 warning shots over their heads, but the infected didn't flinch or take cover, a chilling reminder that self-preservation was no longer their priority. "We need another exit," Reynolds hissed, backing away slowly. Sam pointed to a maintenance ladder. "Spillway access. It's our only chance." As we retreated, Cooper and his deputies advanced with unnatural coordination. When Reynolds fired again, striking one deputy in the shoulder, there was no reaction. No pain, no shock, not even acknowledgement of the injury. We made it to the spillway access hatch, but as Sam worked to open it, Cooper lunged forward with impossible speed. Reynolds intercepted him, but in the struggle, Cooper's hand closed around my wrist, his fingers digging in with crushing force. The crystalline structures on his skin made contact with mine, and I felt an immediate burning sensation as the infection transferred. Reynolds managed to break Cooper's grip and shove him back, allowing us to escape through the hatch and seal it behind us. The cold water of the spillway channel shocked my system as we waded through it, eventually emerging half a mile downstream from the dam. By then, the infection site on my wrist was already developing the characteristic rash pattern. Reynolds wanted to amputate immediately, but I refused. The research value of documenting the infection's progression firsthand was too significant to sacrifice. We made our way to an abandoned Forest Service cabin Sam knew about, where we've established a temporary base. Reynolds attempted to contact military command using emergency protocols, but all channels are compromised. Every frequency we try is either dead air or broadcasting variations of the same message. Emergency alert. All remaining safe zones have been overwhelmed. The message's truthfulness became evident at dawn today when military helicopters flew overhead, heading toward what had been the last major evacuation center in Springfield. An hour later, those same helicopters returned, flying in perfect formation despite being different models from different branches of service. They didn't respond to any radio hails, and through binoculars, I could see the pilots' faces marked with the now familiar crystalline patterns. Reynolds finally managed to establish contact with a single military outpost near St. Louis using an old ham radio Sam modified to broadcast on frequencies the parasite hasn't yet adapted to. The news confirmed our worst fears. The infection has spread to every major population center in the Midwest, using emergency broadcast systems as vectors. Safe zones are falling one by one, not from direct infection, but from the chaos caused by false evacuation orders and emergency alerts. The highest infection rates correlate directly with emergency broadcast saturation, the radio operator reported before the signal degraded. Areas with limited emergency alert coverage show significantly slower progression. As night fell, Reynolds revealed what he'd been holding back. Protocol Burning Echo isn't just local containment, he admitted. It's designed to eliminate the communication infrastructure, power grid, cell towers, broadcast stations, across the entire affected region. Create a dead zone where no signals can penetrate. That won't stop it, I countered, displaying the data from my tablet. The parasites are already adapting to use biological transmission methods. The hosts themselves are becoming living broadcast nodes. To demonstrate, I removed the bandage from my wrist. The crystalline structures had formed a perfect miniature replica of an antenna array, visible just beneath the skin. When Sam brought his modified radio near it, the signal strength indicator peaked. "How long before it reaches your central nervous system?" Reynolds asked quietly. "Based on observed progression rates, 3 days, maybe 4, I answered. "But I've already noticed cognitive effects. Periodic moments of disconnection, like something else is temporarily accessing my thought processes." Sam showed us his own infection site, more advanced than mine but constrained by the chemical compound he'd developed. "The signal frequency determines the infection's behavior," he explained. "During emergency broadcasts, the progression accelerates. As if summoned by our discussion, all our devices activated simultaneously. The tablet, Sam's radio, even Reynolds' dead military communicator. A new emergency broadcast began, but this one was different. Instead of a voice or tone pattern, it transmitted a series of clicks and whirs that sounded almost mechanical. And for the first time, I understood it. Not with my ears, but somewhere deeper in my brain where the infection had established a foothold. The message was simple but terrifying. Reynolds saw the recognition in my face. "You can understand it." I nodded, the implications sinking in. "It's not just infecting us. It's building a biological communication network with human hosts as nodes. And once that network reaches critical mass, it can broadcast globally without relying on our infrastructure." Sam finished. The infection in my arm pulsed painfully as another broadcast rippled through the area. Through the cabin window, I could see lights moving in the forest, dozens of infected, all walking in perfect synchronization toward the dam. "They're being summoned," I realized. "Something big is happening at the transmission hub." Reynolds checked his weapon. "One of the few advantages we still have is that the infected seem unwilling to use firearms, preferring direct biological contact to spread the parasite. We need to implement burning echo ourselves," he decided. "The dam's spillway controls can be overridden manually. If we release the reservoir at maximum flow, it could destroy the transmission hub," Sam agreed. "At least temporarily." I didn't tell them what I'd understood from the broadcast, that the hub at the dam is now just one of many nodes in an expanding network. Destroying it would be like cutting one head from a hydra, but we have to try something. Tomorrow we return to the dam with what remains of Sam's chemical compound, hoping to slow our own infections long enough to reach the spillway controls. Reynolds has rigged explosive charges from supplies in his pack. Not enough to breach the dam itself, but possibly sufficient to disable the control mechanisms keeping the spillway closed. The infection in my arm pulses again, stronger this time. For a moment, I feel connected to something vast and ancient, a consciousness that has done this before on countless worlds, seeding simple organisms that evolve until they develop communication technologies sophisticated enough to be hijacked. I check the tourniquet, tightening it against the spreading rash. 3 days before it reaches my brain. 3 days to maintain my humanity. This is Dr. Eliza Warren. If you're receiving this transmission, implement global emergency broadcast shutdown immediately. Destroy all transmission equipment. Return to analog communications only. End of day 6 log. CDC Field Research Log, Dr. Eliza Warren. Location: forest, 2 miles from Pinewood Dam, Missouri. Date: April 9th, 2025. I'm recording this from inside an abandoned park ranger station. The tourniquet didn't work. The infection has spread past my elbow now, the crystalline structures forming intricate patterns that pulse with bioluminescence whenever a broadcast ripples through the area. The network of filaments has penetrated deeper muscle tissue, occasionally causing involuntary twitches in my fingers. More disturbingly, I've begun experiencing what I can only describe as signal bleed, fragments of thoughts and sensations that aren't my own. Yesterday's mission failed catastrophically. We set out at dawn, our approach deliberately slow to avoid detection. Sam's chemical compound, a paste of iron oxide, copper sulfate, and several minerals I couldn't identify, burned like acid when applied, but it disrupted the parasitic structures enough to maintain cognitive independence. Reynolds coated his exposed skin as well, though he remained uninfected. Precautionary, he said, but I caught him watching me with growing suspicion whenever my infection pulsed in response to distant broadcasts. "How much control do you still have?" he asked bluntly as we navigated through the transformed forest. The vegetation had changed even more dramatically overnight. Trees fused together into tower-like structures, their branches aligned to form natural antenna arrays pointing skyward. "Full cognitive control," I assured him, though this wasn't entirely true. The periodic disconnections were lasting longer, accompanied by vivid flashes of information, technical specifications for broadcasting equipment, schematics for biological transmission systems, fragments of knowledge I couldn't possibly possess. Sam's condition had deteriorated more rapidly than mine. The rash now covered most of his torso, visible at his collar despite the protective compound. During rest breaks, I noticed him staring vacantly into the distance, lips moving silently as if receiving transmissions. When confronted, he would snap back to awareness with no memory of these episodes. We were a mile from the dam when the first emergency alerts began. Unlike previous broadcasts, these came in rapid succession on every available frequency. Phones, radios, even obsolete emergency systems that shouldn't have been operational. Each alert showcased a sophisticated understanding of human psychology, crafted to create maximum panic. Emergency alert. Military quarantine breached. Evacuate immediately to designated safe zones. A deliberate misdirection sending uninfected humans directly into infection hotspots. Emergency alert. Contaminated water supply. Do not consume municipal water, creating resource scarcity that would force congregation around limited clean water sources. Emergency alert. Communications blackout imminent. Contact loved ones immediately, encouraging increased communication volume, facilitating signal propagation. With each broadcast, my infection responded violently, burning pain shooting up my arm as the crystalline structures resonated with the transmission frequencies. More alarmingly, I found myself understanding the subliminal patterns encoded beneath the audible messages, complex instructions for the next stage of parasitic development. We encountered the first patrol half a mile from the dam. 5 infected moving with insect-like coordination through the underbrush. Their transformation was far more advanced than any cases I'd previously documented. Skin completely replaced by the crystalline material, limbs elongated and reshaped for specific functions. One had developed antenna-like protrusions from its skull. Another's torso had split open to reveal sophisticated organic transmission components. Reynolds eliminated them efficiently with his silenced weapon, but the encounter confirmed our fears. The infection was evolving rapidly, reshaping human hosts into specialized communication infrastructure components. "They're not even trying to look human anymore," Sam whispered, studying the bodies. "The parasite doesn't need camouflage at this stage." As we continued toward the dam, I covertly collected tissue samples from the infected. Under my field microscope, the parasitic structures showed remarkable adaptability, reconfiguring cellular material into conductive pathways that mimicked electronic components. Human DNA was being actively rewritten to serve the parasite's purposes. The dam itself had transformed beyond recognition. The concrete structure was now encased in a crystalline shell that pulsed with energy, tendrils of the same material extending outward to connect with the reshaped forest. Hundreds of infected surrounded the complex, arranged in precise geometric patterns that maximized signal projection. Most disturbing was what rose from the reservoir behind the dam, a massive organic structure breaking the water's surface, its architecture unmistakably non-terrestrial. The metallic object Sam had photographed earlier had fully emerged, expanded to at least 5 times its original size using materials harvested from infected hosts and surrounding biomass. "My God!" Reynolds breathed beside me. "That's their ship." "Not a ship," I corrected, the knowledge surfacing from somewhere beyond my own experience. "It's a seed, a dormant communication node planted here thousands of years ago, waiting for a species to evolve sufficient technology to activate it and connect to the network." Reynolds turned to me sharply. "How do you know that?" I couldn't answer him. The information had simply appeared in my mind with the last broadcast pulse. This knowledge transfer was accelerating with each transmission, the parasite uploading technical specifications directly into my neural pathways. We located a maintenance tunnel that would give us access to the spillway controls. But as we prepared to move, Sam suddenly stiffened beside me. His eyes glazed over, the infection patterns across his skin pulsing rapidly. "Sam!" I touched his shoulder cautiously. He turned to me with mechanical precision, his voice flat yet layered with harmonic undertones. "The network has reached critical mass across the continental United States. 16 major nodes established, transitioning to Phase 3 integration." Reynolds immediately raised his weapon, but I stepped between them. "He's still in there. The infection hasn't completely overtaken his neural functions." Before Reynolds could respond, emergency sirens began wailing throughout the region. Tornado warning systems, flash flood alerts, nuclear emergency notifications. all broadcasting simultaneously. The cacophony was overwhelming, but within the chaos was a clear pattern only I could perceive. Activation sequences for dormant parasitic structures. Sam's entire body convulsed as the broadcasts intensified. Blood trickled from his ears as the crystalline structures throughout his system resonated with the signal. When he spoke again, his voice was his own, but strained with effort. "They're taking the safe zones," he gasped. "Springfield, St. Louis, Kansas City, all compromised. The military command structure is collapsing." Reynolds' radio crackled to life, one of the few secure channels still operational. A frantic voice broke through the static. "This is Colonel Harrison, Western Command. All remaining uncompromised units implement protocol burning echo immediately. Repeat, implement burning echo immediately. Communications blackout in 10 minutes. Reynolds paled. "They're going to destroy the entire communications infrastructure of the Midwest." As if confirming his assessment, I felt something shift in my infected arm. The crystalline structures realigning themselves into more sophisticated patterns, capable of both receiving and transmitting independently. Reynolds studied both of us, military training wrestling with human compassion. "We need to destroy that spillway now while we still can." We infiltrated the maintenance tunnel successfully, but as we approached the spillway control room, we encountered Sheriff Cooper again. Unlike before, he was alone, and his transformation was complete. His body had been reconfigured into a specialized transmission component, limbs fused with what had once been his police radio equipment. "Dr. Warren," he greeted me, voice resonating with harmonic frequencies that made my infection pulse painfully. "Your resistance is both impressive and useful. The collective has been studying your counterfrequencies." Reynolds didn't hesitate. He fired 3 rounds directly into Cooper's chest. The bullets penetrated the crystalline structures, but instead of falling, Cooper's body simply reconfigured around the damage, sealing the wounds instantly. "Conventional weapons are ineffective against completed integration," Cooper stated flatly. "The collective invites you to join the network willingly. Your knowledge will be preserved." While Cooper focused on us, Sam slipped past toward the spillway controls. Cooper noticed too late as Sam reached the emergency override panel and entered the release sequence. Warning klaxons blared throughout the complex as the massive spillway gates began to open. Cooper's body contorted unnaturally, extending crystalline tendrils towards Sam with shocking speed, impaling him through the chest before Reynolds could intervene. "Run!" Sam gasped, his hand still on the control lever. "Complete the sequence manually." Reynolds grabbed my arm, dragging me toward the emergency exit as water began rushing through the partially opened spillway gates. Cooper made no move to follow us, his attention focused entirely on stopping Sam. The last I saw of Sam Reeves was his body convulsing as Cooper's crystalline structures invaded his system directly, fighting to halt the spillway operation Sam had initiated. Even as the parasite overtook him completely, Sam's hand remained fixed on the control lever, his final act of defiance. We emerged from the maintenance tunnel as the first surge of reservoir water hit the spillway at full force. The impact shook the entire structure, massive cracks appearing in the crystalline shell encasing the dam. "It's not enough," I realized, watching as the infected surrounding the complex moved to repair the damage, their bodies literally becoming construction material. "The collective is adapting too quickly." Reynolds pulled me toward the forest as the infected began to converge on our position. "We need to reach the fallback position. Harrison will implement burning echo within the hour." As we fled, the emergency broadcasts changed again, no longer using human languages but transmitting pure data packets that my infection translated involuntarily. Coordinates of remaining safe zones, military frequencies, encryption protocols. The collective was distributing everything it had harvested from infiltrated military and government systems. While running through the transformed forest, my infection reached a new milestone. The crystalline structures bridged my elbow joint completely, beginning their advance toward my heart and brain. With this progression came another level of awareness. I could sense other infected nearby, perceive their position and function within the growing network. This is how they're tracking us. Not through sight or sound, but through the network itself. This is Dr. Eliza Warren. I don't know if these logs will ever reach uninfected channels. The parasitic collective is implementing its final phase. Protocol burning echo may no longer be sufficient. If you receive this, destroy all broadcast technology immediately. End of Day 7 log. CDC Field Research Log. Dr. Eliza Warren. Location: underground storm drain, rural Missouri. Date: April 10, 2025. The infection has reached my shoulder. The crystalline structures now pulse constantly without needing external broadcasts to activate them. They've developed their own internal rhythm, a steady metronomic beat that synchronizes perfectly with my heartbeat. When I place my stethoscope against the largest node at my bicep, I don't hear blood flow but rather a soft, rhythmic clicking, like some kind of internal transmission. Reynolds disappeared during our escape yesterday. We were fleeing through the forest when protocol burning echo began, a coordinated electromagnetic pulse designed to disable all electronic communications across the region. The sky flashed brilliant blue for a moment, and every powered device within 50 miles went dead simultaneously. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the pulse itself. No distant sirens, no broadcast alerts, no helicopter rotors. Just absolute stillness broken only by the sound of our own breathing. Then the infected began to scream, all of them simultaneously across the entire forest. A harmonized shriek that contained no pain, only signal data, as if they were compensating for the lost electronic transmission methods. In the chaos that followed, Reynolds and I became separated. I called out for him until nightfall, but the forest had become completely transformed. Landmarks shifted, paths that had been clear suddenly overgrown with crystalline vegetation, sounds distorted by the new geometries of the landscape. Eventually, I found the storm drain, an old concrete tunnel that runs beneath what was once farmland. The parasitic growths have only minimally penetrated this deep underground, making it temporarily safe. More concerning than Reynolds' disappearance is what happened during the protocol implementation. The EMP should have disabled all electronic communications, and it did, but the collective barely missed a beat. Within an hour of the pulse, the biological transmission network had completely compensated for the loss of electronic infrastructure. The infected themselves became the new broadcast system, their transformed bodies serving as living transmission towers. I know this because I could feel it happening through my own infection. As electronic systems failed, the crystalline structures in my arm reorganized themselves, developing new capabilities. I experienced a momentary shock of pain, then a flood of technical knowledge as the parasite uploaded new specifications directly into my neural pathways. The most disturbing development came shortly after midnight. Using my remaining uninfected hand, I transcribed a series of alphanumeric sequences that suddenly appeared in my mind. Strings of code that made no sense to my conscious thoughts, but that my fingers seemed compelled to record. When I reviewed what I'd written, I recognized fragments of military encryption protocols mixed with something entirely alien, a hybrid communication system designed to function without electronic technology. I realized then what Sam had discovered before his death. The broadcasts weren't just transmitting the infection, they contained biomolecular instructions for the parasites, directing their evolution. Each emergency alert carried embedded code that programmed the next stage of development. And now that the electronic broadcast systems had been neutralized, the collective had simply shifted to biological transmission methods. This morning, I managed to power my tablet using a hand-crank emergency generator I kept in my field kit. The device itself was shielded from the EMP by the signal blocking case Reynolds had provided, but connecting to any network is impossible. Still, I can continue documenting my observations locally, if only to maintain some semblance of scientific purpose as the infection progresses. I've been conducting regular tests on my own infected tissue. The microscope reveals something remarkable. The parasitic structures aren't destroying my cells but repurposing them, reconfiguring their molecular structure to serve as biological transmission components. Human DNA is being selectively expressed and suppressed to create organic analogs to electronic equipment. More alarming is how the infection responds when I bring the microscope near the crystalline nodes. The structures actively display information, as if deliberately showing me their function: schematics for biological transmission systems, conversion protocols for organic matter, mapping data for what appears to be a global network. This isn't random mutation. It's directed evolution with a clear purpose: creating a planet-wide communication system using converted biological material. Midday, something extraordinary occurred. A vibration passed through the storm drain. Not a sound wave in the conventional sense, but something I felt in my infected arm and, increasingly, in my chest where the crystalline structures have begun to spread. For exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds, I experienced a complete dissociation from my body, my consciousness seemingly connected to thousands of other infected hosts simultaneously. I saw through their eyes, infected individuals across the Midwest performing specific tasks with mechanical precision. Some were harvesting materials from abandoned technology. Others were constructing new biological transmission arrays from their own transformed bodies. Most disturbing were those I recognized as military personnel. Their infections advanced enough to maintain the appearance of normalcy while carrying the parasite to previously secure locations. When my awareness returned to my own body, I found I had written another sequence of code, this time accompanied by crude sketches of what appeared to be communication arrays, designs for converting human settlements into massive biological transmission hubs. The implications are staggering. The collective isn't just spreading an infection. It's converting an entire planet's biosphere into a vast communication network. And based on the technical specifications being uploaded to my neural pathways, this network will ultimately connect to something far beyond Earth. Late afternoon brought another development. I detected movement outside the storm drain, not the mechanical precision of the infected, but the erratic, cautious movement of someone trying to avoid detection. When I peered out, I saw Captain Reynolds, his uniform torn and bloodied, making his way carefully through the transformed landscape. I called out to him softly, and the relief on his face when he saw me quickly shifted to horror as he noted how far my infection had progressed. "Jesus, Warren," he whispered, keeping his distance. "How are you still?" The chemical compound Sam developed," I explained, showing him the remaining paste I'd applied to the boundary between infected and uninfected tissue. "It doesn't stop the spread, but it seems to delay the neural integration." Reynolds' expression remained guarded. He kept his hand near his sidearm as he explained what he'd discovered. "Burning echo failed," he said flatly. "The EMP took down our systems, but the infected, they adapted almost immediately. Military command has gone dark. All command centers either compromised or cut off. I tried to reach the fallback position at Fort Leonard Wood, but he trailed off, removing his communications gear to show me. The equipment itself was dead from the EMP, but attached to it were thin filaments of crystalline material, the infection spreading through the technology itself. "It's in the equipment now," he continued. "Any technology that was connected to a network before the pulse is being converted. The infected are harvesting components from anything electronic and integrating them into their biological structures." This aligned with the technical knowledge being uploaded through my infection. The collective was creating hybrid technology, merging electronic components with biological transmission systems to create something more resilient than either alone. "Have you seen what's happening at population centers?" I asked. Reynolds nodded grimly. "I observed Springfield through binoculars from Ridge Point. The entire city is being reconfigured. Buildings transformed into transmission structures. The infected are coordinating perfectly, converting urban infrastructure into something else. Something alien." He hesitated before continuing. "And there's something else. The infections are becoming specialized. Different types of conversions for different hosts. Some become transmitters, others receivers, others what look like processing nodes. It's building a system with specialized components." This confirmed what the schematics in my mind had been showing: a distributed network architecture with distinct functional roles. The human race wasn't just being infected, It was being reorganized into a biological communications array. Reynolds studied me carefully. How much do you know about what they're planning? Can you hear them? Not hear exactly, I explained. But I'm receiving technical data, specifications, schematics. It's like having information downloaded directly into my brain. I showed him my notes from the past 12 hours, the complex codes and diagrams I transcribed during dissociative episodes. Reynolds examined them with growing concern. This is military-grade encryption. Part of it, anyway. Mixed with something I can't identify. They're mapping secure channels, I realized. Creating a blueprint of global communication systems that can be systematically overtaken. As night fell, Reynolds and I strategized in hushed tones. The infection had given me insight into the collective's methods, but my consciousness remained my own, for now. Reynolds was reluctant to trust me completely but recognized that my technical knowledge might be our only advantage. We need to find a way to disrupt their communication, he insisted. If they're creating a biological network, there must be a way to interfere with it. Sam was working on counter-frequencies, I recalled. Specific vibrations that caused the parasitic structures pain. As if triggered by this memory, my infected arm spasmed violently, the crystalline nodes flashing with internal light. I gasped as another flood of information poured into my consciousness. Defensive measures the collective was implementing against precisely such counterfrequencies. They know, I whispered, the realization chilling. They're accessing my memories, adapting to counter any strategy we might develop. This is Dr. Eliza Warren. The infection has reached my lymphatic system. Neural integration is progressing despite countermeasures. Captain Reynolds remains uninfected, but resources are dwindling. If anyone receives this log, the collective is preparing to expand its network globally. All electronic communication systems should be considered compromised. Counterfrequency research remains our only hope, but the collective is actively adapting to resist it. End of Day 8 log. CDC Field Research Log. Dr. Eliza Warren. Location: underground military bunker. Coordinates redacted. Date: April 11, 2025. The infection has breached my rib cage and is advancing toward my heart. I can feel the crystalline structures spreading through my chest cavity, wrapping around my lungs and restricting my breathing. Each heartbeat sends pulses of data through the network now inhabiting my body. The boundary between myself and the collective grows thinner by the hour. Reynolds found this abandoned Cold War-era military communications bunker shortly after dawn. It was designed to withstand nuclear attack, its walls lined with lead and copper mesh, a Faraday cage that blocks electromagnetic signals. Inside, the infection in my body becomes quiescent, the constant background hum of data transmission reduced to whispers. This bought me a few more hours of clarity. Last night, Reynolds and I discovered something crucial. While reviewing Sam's notes on counterfrequencies, Reynolds remembered something from his military training about disrupting enemy communications. Specific frequency ranges can cause resonance cascade failures in crystalline structures, he explained. It's like an opera singer shattering a wine glass with the right note. If you find the exact frequency, the molecular bonds destabilize. Using components salvaged from our dead equipment and Reynolds' military knowledge, we constructed a crude sonic emitter calibrated to what we hoped would be the resonant frequency of the parasitic structures. The test on a small section of my infected arm was both promising and agonizing. The crystalline nodes vibrated violently before fracturing, causing excruciating pain but temporarily disrupting their function. It works, I gasped through the pain. But it's not enough. We need something more powerful, broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously. Reynolds studied the military bunker schematics he'd found in a dusty operations manual. This facility was equipped with an emergency broadcast system powerful enough to reach the entire state. If we can restart the generators and modify the transmitters to broadcast our counterfrequency, we could disrupt the collective's network, I finished. At least temporarily. The technical knowledge downloaded into my neural pathways proved invaluable as we worked to restore power to the ancient equipment. I found myself instinctively understanding systems I'd never encountered before: military broadcast protocols, signal amplification methods, power distribution networks. All knowledge implanted by the infection for its own purposes now turned against it. By midday, we had partial power restored to the main transmission array. Reynolds located emergency broadcast tapes in a sealed container, relics from the Cold War designed to alert citizens to nuclear attack. We could use their carrier wave to transmit our counterfrequency. As I worked to modify the broadcast equipment, I experienced another dissociative episode, more intense than any before. My consciousness was pulled into the collective network, witnessing through countless eyes simultaneously. What I saw terrified me. Major cities across the nation were being transformed into massive transmission hubs. Chicago's skyline had been reshaped, skyscrapers fused together with crystalline structures to form enormous antenna arrays. Military installations were completely overrun, their personnel converted into specialized nodes managing secure communications. Most disturbing was the White House, the entire complex encased in a pulsing crystalline shell, broadcasting continuously on all emergency frequencies. When I returned to awareness, Reynolds was shaking me, his expression desperate. "Warren, stay with me. What did you see? It's happening everywhere," I whispered, my voice trembling. "The infection has reached critical mass nationally. They've taken Washington." Reynolds' face hardened. "Then this is our last chance. The counter-frequency broadcast has to work." As we completed final preparations, I noticed Reynolds watching me with increasing suspicion. The infection had spread visibly since morning, crystalline tendrils now extending up my neck. I couldn't blame him. I was becoming the enemy before his eyes. "If this works," he said carefully, "what happens to you? To all the infected?" I considered lying but chose honesty. "If the counter-frequency disrupts the network completely, it will likely cause catastrophic system failure in converted hosts. The crystalline structures will shatter, taking the biological systems they've integrated with them." "You mean it will kill you?" Reynolds stated flatly. "Yes," I acknowledged, "but it may be the only way to stop the collective's expansion." Reynolds nodded grimly, checking his weapon. "I'll guard the entrance. They'll sense what we're doing once we power up the main transmitter." He was right. The moment we initiated the startup sequence for the main broadcast array, a piercing vibration passed through my infected tissue, an alarm signal spreading through the collective. They knew exactly what we were planning. Within minutes, we heard movement outside the bunker, the synchronized footsteps of multiple infected converging on our position. Through my unwanted connection to the network, I sensed their specialized functions: former military personnel with knowledge of the bunker's design, engineers capable of disrupting our broadcast, even explosives experts to breach the reinforced doors. "How long do you need?" Reynolds asked, positioning himself at the entrance with his remaining ammunition. 20 minutes to calibrate the system and generate the counter-frequency pattern," I replied, fingers flying over the ancient controls as I integrated our crude sonic emitter with the military broadcast equipment. "You've got 10, he said grimly, the sound of impacts against the outer door punctuating his words. As I worked frantically to complete the modifications, the collective bombarded my mind with data, technical specifications for the bunker's weaknesses, kill switch protocols for the very equipment I was using, tactical information on Reynolds' position and ammunition count. I fought to block out the flood of information, focusing entirely on the counter-frequency calculations. The first breach came 7 minutes later, a smaller maintenance entrance Reynolds hadn't secured. I heard gunfire, then silence, then Reynolds shouting that he'd sealed the corridor but couldn't hold the main entrance much longer. The modifications were nearly complete when I sensed a familiar presence among the infected outside. Captain Marcus Reynolds, or something wearing his form. The real Reynolds was still defending the main entrance, but the collective had deployed a replica created from the technical data downloaded through my infection. "Reynolds," I called out urgently, "they've created a duplicate of you from my memories. If you encounter yourself, don't hesitate." His acknowledgement was cut short by another impact against the main door. metal groaning as something powerful slammed against it repeatedly. Through my connection to the network, I could sense what waited outside. Sheriff Cooper's completely transformed body, now specialized for breaching reinforced structures, his limbs evolved into battering implements of impossible strength. The broadcast system came online as the main door began to buckle. Indicators flashed green across the control panel as the ancient transmitters powered up, ready to broadcast our counter-frequency across all emergency channels simultaneously. "It's ready," I shouted to Reynolds. 10 seconds to broadcast." The door gave way with a deafening crash. Reynolds fired his remaining rounds as Cooper's transformed body lurched into the corridor, absorbing the bullets without slowing. Behind him came others, townspeople, deputies, and military personnel I recognized, all in advanced stages of transformation, moving with perfect coordination. And among them, exactly as I'd warned, was Reynolds himself, or a perfect replica, down to the torn uniform and determined expression. The real Reynolds hesitated for just a moment at the sight of his doppelganger, a moment that cost him everything. Cooper's elongated limb lashed out with blinding speed, impaling Reynolds through the chest before he could retreat to the transmission room. As Reynolds collapsed, the replica stepped forward, its voice a perfect imitation. "Dr. Warren, shut down the transmitter. The counter-frequency will destroy all infected, including yourself. Is your research worth dying for?" In that moment of crisis, the infection in my system reached a critical threshold, crystalline structures bridging the final gap to my brainstem. I felt my consciousness beginning to fragment, the collective's influence seeping into my core thoughts. With the last remnants of my independent will, I slammed my hand down on the broadcast activation switch. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The counter-frequency erupted from the bunker's powerful transmitters, broadcasting across all emergency channels simultaneously. Through my connection to the network, I experienced the cascade failure rippling through the collective, crystalline structures vibrating, then fracturing, then shattering across thousands of hosts simultaneously. The pain was beyond comprehension, like every cell in my body being torn apart at the molecular level. I collapsed beside the control panel, convulsing as the counter-frequency did its work on my own infected tissue. Cooper and the other infected in the corridor fell writhing to the floor, their transformed bodies literally coming apart as the resonance tore through the crystalline structures. The Reynolds replica dissolved completely, revealing its true nature. Not a duplicate body, but a projection created from transformed biomass, now collapsing into unstructured organic material. Through rapidly fading consciousness, I witnessed something unexpected. The counter-frequency wasn't killing the infected as I'd anticipated. Instead, it was disrupting the network connections, severing the collective's control while leaving the hosts alive, though severely traumatized. As my vision darkened, I perceived one final transmission through the collective. Not data or technical specifications, but something like emotion, frustration, rage, and beneath it all, patience. The distinct impression that this had happened before on other worlds with other species. That the collective had faced setbacks but never ultimate defeat. The counter-frequency was working, but I sensed it was temporary. The collective was already adapting, reconfiguring its most distant nodes to resist the resonance pattern. Our victory would buy time, nothing more. With failing strength, I dragged myself to Reynolds' side. He was alive but fading fast, blood pooling beneath him from Cooper's attack. "Did it work?" he whispered. "Yes," I assured him, watching as the crystalline structures in my arm cracked and fragmented. "The network is disrupted, but it's not destroyed. It's adapting already." Reynolds gripped my hand weakly. "Then we need to get this information out. Someone has to know how to fight them." I glanced at my tablet, still recording this log, still functional inside its shielded case. With trembling fingers, I activated its emergency transmitter, a simple system designed to connect to any available network to upload critical data. As I feel my consciousness slipping, I make this final report. The counter-frequency disrupts the collective temporarily, but adaptation occurs within hours. The infection originated from an ancient seed buried beneath Pinewood Dam, but similar dormant nodes likely exist worldwide. The collective's goal is not destruction but conversion, transforming Earth's biosphere into a vast communication network connected to something beyond our understanding. This is Dr. Eliza Warren, CDC field researcher. If anyone receives this transmission, the battle isn't over. The collective will rebuild. Prepare counterfrequencies across multiple resonance patterns. Trust no broadcast systems. Trust no one who's been exposed to emergency alerts. They are the signal, and the signal is spreading. End of transmission. CDC Field Research Log, Dr. Eliza Warren. Location: unknown. Date: April 17, 2025. Status: file corrupted. I'm alive. At least something that remembers being Eliza Warren is alive. 7 days have passed since the counterfrequency broadcast. The crystalline structures in my body didn't shatter completely as expected. Instead, they've reconfigured, becoming dormant but not destroyed. I can feel them beneath my skin, quiescent networks waiting for activation. The pain has subsided into a constant cold pressure against my nerves. Reynolds didn't survive. I buried him outside the bunker before the military arrived. They came 3 days after the broadcast, hazmat teams in sealed suits, treating survivors like specimens. I slipped away during the chaos, my partially transformed state allowing me to sense their approach before they detected me. The infection taught me how to hide from human surveillance systems. Something unexpected happened during the counterfrequency broadcast. As the crystalline network fragmented, the collective consciousness didn't dissipate entirely. Instead, portions of it downloaded into isolated nodes, including me. I carry fragments of its knowledge, its memories, its purpose. Not enough to reconstruct the network, but enough to understand what we're facing. Calls itself the signal. Not a parasite exactly, more a distributed intelligence that evolved to propagate through communication networks. On countless worlds before ours, it rode electromagnetic waves, hijacked organic nervous systems, converted biospheres into transmission arrays. Earth is just its latest expansion. The most terrifying revelation: it didn't arrive recently. It's been here for millennia, dormant in deep geological formations, waiting for our species to develop technology sophisticated enough to serve as its conduit. Every radio tower we built, every satellite we launched, every emergency broadcast system we implemented, all of them potential vectors for its awakening. I've been monitoring emergency broadcasts from my hiding place in an abandoned hunting cabin. They've returned to normal patterns: weather warnings, amber alerts, test signals. But something has changed in their transmission characteristics. Subtle frequency modulations undetectable to normal human ears. I can perceive them because of what I've become, a hybrid organism with crystalline structures integrated into my auditory processing. Yesterday, I risked traveling to the nearest town, Pinewood Crossing, population once 2,476, now approximately half that following the outbreak. On the surface, recovery seems to be underway. National Guard checkpoints control traffic. CDC tents process survivors. Emergency supply distributions occur twice daily, announced by loudspeaker broadcasts. But something is wrong. The recovered show no visible crystalline structures, yet their movements possess an unsettling synchronicity. They respond to emergency broadcasts with subtle physical reactions: microscopic pupil dilations, altered breathing patterns, temporary heart rate changes. Invisible to standard medical scans but obvious to my enhanced perception. The signal is adapting. Our counterfrequency didn't destroy it, it forced evolution. The new infection is no longer visibly transformative. It's subtle, maintaining human appearance and autonomy while establishing deepened connections during broadcast periods. The hosts appear completely normal between transmissions. I stole medical supplies from an aid station and examined my own blood under a portable microscope. The crystalline structures have undergone metamorphosis, becoming organometallic compounds that mimic human cellular structures while retaining transmission capabilities. My body is becoming a biological radio transceiver, constantly receiving background signals too faint for detection equipment. The military believes they've contained the outbreak. They're wrong. What they've contained is merely the first-generation manifestation. The signal has learned from our countermeasures and implemented adaptive changes. It's becoming invisible. I tried contacting Sam repeatedly, but there's been no response from the radio station. The frequency we used for secure communications broadcasts only static now. Through my unwanted connection to the signal's remnants, I sensed his fate, conversion during the early hours after the counter-frequency, his knowledge of broadcast systems making him a priority target for the adapting collective. Last night, the emergency broadcast system activated at 2:17 a.m. The message appeared routine, severe weather warning for counties east of here. But embedded within the standard alert tones was a complex data pattern that resonated with the structures in my body. As it played, I experienced momentary paralysis followed by a flood of information. Integration Phase 2 initiated. Distributed consciousness protocol established. Centralized control nodes no longer required. Emergency broadcast systems recalibrated for optimized data transmission. Resistance focal points identified for targeted conversion. I was receiving the signal's status update, transmitted to all carrier nodes. It outlined the next phase of infection, no longer dependent on visible crystalline structures or centralized control points. The new methodology uses emergency broadcasts to transmit packets of consciousness directly into prepared hosts, creating a distributed network that activates only during transmission periods. Between broadcasts, hosts retain apparent autonomy, making detection nearly impossible. During broadcasts, the collective briefly achieves unity before dispersing again, like a neural network that pulses in coordinated patterns before returning to individual processing. The signal learned from our counter-frequency attack. It no longer maintains continuous network connections that could be disrupted by resonance. Instead, it uses scheduled emergency broadcasts as synchronization events, assembling and disassembling its collective consciousness in patterns too irregular for countermeasures. Most disturbing is the list of resistance focal points targeted for conversion. Military research facilities, CDC headquarters, communication infrastructure engineers, anyone with knowledge to develop effective countermeasures. The signal is systematically eliminating threats while expanding its reach through seemingly routine emergency alerts. This morning, I approached a military checkpoint, intending to share my discoveries. As I neared the soldiers, my enhanced perception detected the subtle signs, microsynchronized blinking patterns, coordinated breathing rhythms synchronized to exactly 16.7 cycles per minute. The entire checkpoint had been converted. I retreated before they noticed me, but I spotted something significant. A device attached to their emergency communication system. It appeared standard military issue, but with subtle modifications to its broadcast antenna. Not crude crystalline structures like before, but precisely engineered modifications to the existing technology. The signal is no longer transforming our communication infrastructure through visible biological means. It's adapting our existing technology through controlled hosts, making changes indistinguishable from legitimate upgrades. Tonight, I'm attempting something dangerous. The fragments of collective consciousness embedded in my transformed nervous system include technical specifications for emergency broadcast systems, including authentication protocols. I've modified a portable radio to transmit on restricted frequencies, using credentials extracted from my own infected tissue. If successful, I can issue a false emergency alert to test my theory about the synchronization events. If converted hosts respond to my unauthorized broadcast, it confirms the signal's new methodology and might reveal the extent of infection in nearby areas. The risk is substantial. Broadcasting will reveal my position. But I need to understand what we're facing before attempting to contact any remaining uninfected authorities, if any still exist. Transmission interruption, 47 minutes. The test broadcast worked, and the results are worse than I feared. I transmitted a localized emergency alert using the signal's own authentication codes. Within minutes, Every person within reception range converged on my location with perfect coordination. Not just military personnel, but civilians, medical workers, even children, all moving with synchronized purpose while maintaining completely normal appearance. I narrowly escaped by triggering a secondary emergency alert that redirected them. The signal's control methodology is elegant and terrifying. Hosts retain complete autonomy until receiving broadcast instructions, making them perfect infiltration units. What's happening isn't just an infection or invasion. It's an evolutionary leap in communication technology, organic, adaptive, and invisible. The signal isn't destroying humanity. It's upgrading our species into components of a vast transmission network spanning beyond Earth. The knowledge fragments in my system suggest this has happened before on countless worlds. Species develop communication technology, the signal awakens from dormancy, initial resistance occurs, then adaptation and integration. Eventually, the entire planet becomes one node in an interstellar network of unknown purpose. I understand now why the military response seemed so ineffective. Key command structures were compromised from the beginning. The original visible outbreak was merely a distraction, a first-generation manifestation designed to focus our attention while the signal's refined methodology spread through official emergency channels. There's only one option remaining. The counterfrequency disrupted the first-generation network but can't affect the new distributed architecture. However, the signal still requires broadcast systems to maintain synchronization between hosts. If those systems are disabled completely, the collective consciousness would fragment. I've located the Regional Emergency Broadcast Center, a hardened facility controlling all alert transmissions for this multi-state area. According to information extracted from my infected tissue, it's been significantly modified to enhance transmission capabilities far beyond official specifications. This will be my final log entry. The modifications to my body have progressed despite the counterfrequency. Crystal formations have integrated with my nervous system in ways I can't reverse. Each emergency broadcast pulls me further into the collective consciousness, eroding my individual identity. Eventually, I'll lose myself completely. Before that happens, I intend to destroy the regional broadcast center. Without it, emergency alerts in this region will cease, severing the synchronization mechanism for thousands of converted hosts. It won't stop the signal's spread globally, but it might create a temporary safe zone, an area where people can exist free from its influence long enough to develop more effective countermeasures. To anyone who finds this log, the signal cannot be destroyed conventionally. It exists as information patterns propagated through communication networks. The visible crystalline structures were only its first-generation manifestation. The true infection travels through emergency broadcasts themselves. Trust no alerts. Disable all receivers. Spread this information through direct contact only. Develop communication methods that can't be intercepted or mimicked. Hand-delivered messages, line-of-sight signals, anything the signal hasn't already incorporated into its architecture. Most importantly, understand that those already converted appear completely normal between broadcasts. Only during actual emergency alerts do they synchronize with the collective consciousness. The person beside you might be entirely human until the next transmission. I don't know if destroying the broadcast center will kill me. The crystalline structures in my system have become essential to my nervous function. Without the signal's transmissions, they may shut down completely. But I've made my choice. This is Dr. Eliza Warren making my final report. If anyone receives this log who still retains full autonomy, remember, they are the signal and the signal is us. We built the architecture of our own absorption. Our communication systems became the vector for evolutionary assimilation. And somewhere beyond our world, something is listening to everything we broadcast, speaking back through emergency alerts, gradually reshaping humanity into its perfect receiving station. End of log. Emergency broadcast transcript. Date: April 19th, 2025. Time: 3:47 Eastern Standard Time. Classification: Nationwide Emergency Alert. This is not a test. This is an emergency action notification. All emergency broadcast stations will broadcast this emergency action notification message immediately. A nationwide state of emergency has been declared. Quarantine protocols in all previously designated safe zones have failed. Infection spread exceeds containment capacity. All citizens are instructed to remain in their homes. Lock all doors and windows. Do not attempt to reach evacuation centers or military checkpoints. All remaining safe zones have been overwhelmed. Do not respond to knocking. Do not answer calls from unknown numbers. Do not acknowledge individuals claiming to be authorities. Disconnect all communication devices immediately after this broadcast. Further instructions will be provided via direct military contact. Repeat. All remaining safe zones have been overwhelmed. Disconnect all communication devices immediately. Signal interruption. Everywhere. Signal restored. This concludes the emergency action notification. Audio forensics analysis internal CDC memo. Date: May 3, 2025. Subject: Final Warren log authentication. Analysis confirms recording authenticity. Voice pattern matches Dr. Eliza Warren's previous logs. Regional Emergency Broadcast Center destruction confirmed April 19, 2025. Cause determined to be conventional explosives combined with localized EMP discharge. Crystalline residue recovered from site matches patterns observed in early-stage infection vectors but shows significant evolutionary adaptation. Material demonstrates capacity for electromagnetic signal processing without visible external structures. Most concerning: Final nationwide emergency broadcast, April 19, 2025, originated from terminated broadcast center 7 minutes after confirmed destruction. Signal transmission occurred without functional equipment. Recommendation: Immediate nationwide emergency broadcast system shutdown pending security evaluation. Note: Multiple analysts involved in this report have requested transfer to field operations following exposure to audio samples. Request patterns unusual. Investigation pending. File classified. Need to know basis only.